Expand the aperture. The ideal candidate is out there. She has passion, intellect, integrity, and a unique perspective. Now, how do you find her and get her on board? There are 4 links in this critical chain: sourcing, interviewing, hiring, and compensation. Let's start with sourcing, which in turn starts with defining the type of candidate for whom you are looking. Our recruiting partner, Martha Josephson, calls this expanding the aperture. The aperture is the opening in a camera through which light flows to the sensors that capture the image. A typical hiring manager will have a narrow aperture, considering only certain people with certain titles in certain fields, those who will undoubtedly do today's job well. But the successful manager sets a wider aperture and rounds up people beyond the usual suspects. Let's say you like to hire people from a particular company, one that is well known for harboring tremendous talent. Said company knows that you want its employees and has made it pretty hard to pry people out of there. If you expand the aperture and look for someone who can do the job well tomorrow as well as today, you can find some gems, and you can offer them opportunities their current employer might not be able to. The engineer who wants to move into product management but is blocked from leaving his team. The product manager who wants to get into sales, but there's no open headcount. You can get great talent if you are willing to take a risk on people by challenging them to do new things. They will join you precisely because you are willing to take that risk. And those willing to take risks introduce the exact self-selection tendency you are looking for. For example, if you're hiring a software engineer and all your code is written in a certain language, that doesn't necessarily mean you should hire an expert in that language. You should hire the best engineer you can find, regardless of her coding preference. Because if she's the best, she can down enough Java to see how to make the Python go. Java, C, Python, and Go all being the names of computer languages. And when the language of choice changes, it inevitably will, she'll be able to adapt better than anyone else. Supercomputer pioneer Seymour Cray used to deliberately hire for inexperience because it brought him people who do not usually know what's supposed to be impossible. We do something similar at Google with our Associate Product Manager, APM, program, which was created by Marissa Mayer back when she was a director on Jonathan's team with a prime directive of hiring the smartest computer scientists we could find straight out of school. This isn't unusual. Lots of companies hire smart, recent graduates. That's the easy part. The hard part is to give them vital roles in projects with real impact. Smart creatives thrive in these positions, while risk-averse managers cringe. They have no experience. Good. What if they screw up? They will, but they will also succeed in ways you can't imagine. Brian Rakowski set the tone pretty well as our very first APM, hired straight out of Stanford and immediately given product management responsibility for Gmail, working directly with lead engineer Paul Buckheit. Brian is now a lead on the Android team, and Gmail hasn't done too poorly either. Of course, sometimes we screw this up ourselves. Once, Salar Kamangar was impressed with one of our young marketing associates and wanted to transfer said young man into the APM program. Unfortunately, the APM program only accepted candidates with degrees in computer science, which this associate didn't have. Although Salar argued that the young associate was a self-taught programmer and had a history of working closely with engineers and shipping things, several influential execs, including Jonathan, steadfastly refused to expand the aperture and denied the transfer. The young marketing associate, Kevin Systrom, eventually left Google. He co-founded a company called Instagram, which he later sold to Facebook for $1 billion. You're welcome, Kevin. One way to make expanding the aperture work is to judge candidates based on trajectory. Our former colleague, Jared Smith, notes that the best people are often the ones whose careers are climbing, because when you project their path forward, there is potential for great growth and achievement. There are plenty of strong, experienced people who have hit a plateau. With those candidates, you know exactly what you are getting, which is good. But there is much less potential for the extraordinary. Bad. It's important to note that age and trajectory are not correlated, and that there are exceptions to the trajectory guideline, such as people running their own business, or those with non-traditional career paths. Expanding the aperture is much harder as you work your way up the corporate food chain. Hiring senior people is almost always experience-based, and experience is important. But in most industries today, technology has rendered the environment so dynamic that having the right experience is only a part of what it takes to succeed. Companies consistently overvalue relevant experience when judging senior candidates. They should be more focused on what talented, smart creatives have to offer. For example, in 2003, when we were looking for a head of human resources to round out our executive team, we interviewed something like 50 candidates, many with great experience in the traditional sense, but none who were qualified to do what we knew needed to be done. We were growing a company faster than perhaps any other company in history. So all the standard operating experience that these candidates brought to the table was not going to cut it. We needed executives who understood how to build scalable engines on which a company could run at a fundamentally different pace. It was a long process. At one point, Eric blurted out, "Find me a Rhodes Scholar who is also an astrophysicist." We decided, after some discussion, that an astrophysicist, although probably qualified for the job, wouldn't come to Google to be a business executive. "All right," Sergey said, "get me a law partner." Jonathan found one of the law partner candidates in Sergey's office one day, furiously writing a contract. Sergey had given him an assignment: write a contract that is well done, comprehensive, and funny. A half hour later, the candidate delivered Contract 666, whereby Mr. Sergey Brin sold his soul to the devil in exchange for $1 and numerous other considerations. The piece was brilliant and funny. But he didn't get the job. Not technical enough. With the lawyer approach not working out, our search partner, Martha Josephson, suggested that the right combination might be McKinsey partner plus Rhodes Scholar, and brought us Shona Brown, whom we hired to run business operations, even though she had never held a role like that before. It worked out so well that when we needed a new CFO in 2008 to replace the estimable George Reyes, Eric asked Martha to find another Shona Brown. She found Rhodes Scholar and former McKinsey partner Patrick Pitchett, who became CFO in 2008. Google's preference for talented people goes well beyond senior execs. One year, Jonathan was heading out to our London office, where his agenda included speaking at an event with a group of Rhodes Scholars that Shona was hosting. He was trying to determine how to decide which of them would receive offers to interview in Mountain View, when he ran into Sergey in a hallway and explained his problem. "Why decide at all?" Sergey said. "Offer all of them jobs." Which seemed crazy at first, but not so crazy when he thought about it. Some of those Rhodes Scholars went on to do very well at Google. Expanding the aperture brings risks. It leads to some failures, and the startup costs for hiring a brilliant, inexperienced person are higher than those of hiring a less brilliant, experienced one. The hiring manager may not want to bear the costs, but such concerns need to be set aside for the greater good. Hiring brilliant generalists is far better for the company. Everyone knows someone great. You probably know someone whose resume is truly exceptional. Someone who climbed K2, is an Olympic-class hockey player, published a critically acclaimed novel, worked her way through college and finished cum laude, just had an art exhibit, started a real nonprofit, speaks 4 languages, owns 3 patents, codes top 100 apps for fun, plays lead guitar in a band, and once danced on stage with Bruno Mars. If you know at least one person like that, then it stands to reason that everyone you work with knows one of them too. Then why do you let only recruiters handle recruiting? If everyone knows someone great, why isn't it everyone's job to recruit that great person? Establishing a successful hiring culture that delivers a steady stream of outstanding people starts with understanding the role of recruiters in sourcing candidates. Hint: it isn't their exclusive realm. Don't get us wrong, we love good recruiters. We work with them all the time and appreciate their insights and their hard work. But the job of finding people belongs to everyone, and this fact needs to be woven into the fabric of the company. Recruiters can manage the process, but everyone should be recruited into recruiting. This is easy when a company is small, since getting all hands on the recruiting deck is natural. At a certain size, however, in our experience the number is around 500 employees, managers start worrying about headcount allocation more than about whom they're going to get to fill those allocations. You hear about fighting for headcount a lot more than finding great people, because the latter is what those recruiters are for, right? Not exactly. The problem with overdependence on recruiters is that it becomes tempting for recruiters to stop looking for the cream of the crop and settle for the half and half, or even the skim milk. They don't have to live with their mistakes. The company does. On the other hand, it is easy for any company to double in size with great people. All it takes, as Larry often told us, is for each employee to refer just one great person. When you completely delegate recruiting, quality degrades. The simple way to keep recruiting in everyone's job description is to measure it. Count referrals and interviews. Measure how quickly people fill out interview feedback forms. Encourage employees to help with recruiting events. And track how often they do. Then make these metrics count when it comes to performance reviews and promotions. Recruiting is everyone's job, so grade it that way. Interviewing is the most important skill. The loftier your hiring aspirations, the more challenging and important the interview process becomes. The interview is where you truly learn about a person. It is far more important than the resume. The resume tells you that the person got a 3.8 from an elite school while majoring in computer science and running track. The interview tells you that the person is a boring grind who hasn't had an original idea in years. The most important skill any business person can develop is interviewing. You've probably never read that in any management book or heard it in an MBA course. CEOs, professors, and venture capitalists always, correctly, preach the primacy of people when it comes to success. But they often don't say how to get those great people. They talk in theory, but business is practice, and in practice, your job is to determine a candidate's merit in the context of an artificial, time-constrained interview. That calls for a unique and difficult skill set, and the simple truth is most people are not good at it. Go back to the initial response people had in our hypothetical "what is the most important thing you do at work" exercise, which was go to meetings. Meetings are indeed how we spend the majority of our time. The nice thing about meetings is that the higher up you are on the food chain, the less you have to prepare for them. When you're the top dog, or somewhere up there on the canine hierarchy, other people prepare for the meeting, while all you have to do is listen and opine. Your colleagues leave with the action items, and you leave with nothing to do but run to the next meeting. Conducting a good interview requires something different: preparation. This is true regardless of whether you're a senior executive or a fresh associate. Being a good interviewer requires understanding the role, reading the resume, and, most important, considering your questions. You should first do your own research on who the interviewee is and why they are important. Look at their resume, do a Google search, find out what they worked on, and do a search on that, too. You aren't looking for the drunken carnival photos, but rather trying to form an opinion of them. Is this someone who is interesting? Then, in the interview, use your researched knowledge of their projects to dig deeper. You need to ask challenging questions that push the candidate. What was the low point in the project? Or why was it successful? You want to learn if the candidate was the hammer or the egg, someone who caused a change or went along with it. Your objective is to find the limits of his capabilities, not have a polite conversation. But the interview shouldn't be an overly stressful experience. The best interviews feel like intellectual discussions between friends. What books are you reading right now? Questions should be large and complex with a range of answers to draw out the person's thought process that the interviewer can push back on to see how the candidate stakes out and defends a position. It's a good idea to reuse questions across candidates so you can calibrate responses. When asking about a candidate's background, you want to ask questions that, rather than offering her a chance to regurgitate her experiences, allow her to express what insights she gained from them. Get her to show off her thinking, not just her resume. What surprised you about is one good way to approach this, as it is just different enough to surprise a candidate, so you don't get rehearsed responses, and forces her to think about her experiences from a slightly different perspective. How did you pay for college is another good one, as is, if I were to look at the web history section of your browser, what would I learn about you that isn't on your resume? Both of these can lead to a far better understanding of the candidate. They are also quite specific, which helps you gauge how well someone listens and parses questions. Scenario questions are often helpful, but more so when interviewing more senior people, because they can reveal how a person will use or trust their own staff. For example, when you're in a crisis or need to make an important decision, how do you do it? Will often reveal if a candidate is of the if you want something done do it yourself ilk, or if they will rely on the people around them. The former is more likely to get frustrated with the people who work for them and thus hang on to control. The latter more likely to hire great people and have faith in them. Generic answers to these questions indicate someone who lacks insight on issues. You want the answers to be interesting, or at least specific. If the answers you get are cut and pasted from marketing claims or are simply the reflection of commonly held wisdom, then you have a generic candidate, one who will not be adept at thinking deeply about things. Then there are Google's infamous brain teasers. In recent years, we have phased out the practice of asking these puzzling questions during interviews. Many of the questions and answers ended up online, so continuing to ask them wouldn't necessarily reveal a candidate's ability to reason out a complex problem, as much as her ability to conduct research before an interview, and then act as if she hadn't memorized the answers to all of our brain teasers. A valuable skill, to be sure, just not the one we're looking for. The brain teasers also became a lightning rod for criticism as an elitist tool. To those critics, let us say once and for all, you are right. We want to hire the best minds available because we believe there is a big difference between people who are great and those who are good, and we will do everything we can to separate the two. And if you, our critics, still persist in believing that elitism in hiring is wrong, well, we have just one question for you. If you have 12 coins, one of which is counterfeit, and a different weight than the others, and a balance, how do you identify the counterfeit coin in just 3 weighings? With the first weighing, pull out 4 coins and weigh the other 2 sets of 4 against each other. If those 2 sets balance, then the counterfeit coin must be in the third set, the one that you set aside. In this case, pick 2 coins from among the 8 that you just weighed, and 2 from the unweighed set of 4. If these balance, then the counterfeit coin is in the pair of coins that has never been on the balance. If they do not balance, then the counterfeit coin is in the pair that was introduced in the second weighing. In the third weighing, balance one of the coins from the pair with the bad coin against a control good coin. If they balance, the counterfeit one is the one sitting on the table. If not, it's the one on the scale. That was the easier scenario. Let's see if you can figure out the harder one, when the first weighing doesn't balance, on your own. There are 2 reasons we like questions like this one. First, you see if someone has the intellect to deconstruct a complex problem, regardless of whether they get to the answer. Second, do they enjoy the process? When preparing for an interview, it helps to keep in mind that the interviewee is not the only person being interviewed. A highly qualified candidate is evaluating you as much as you are evaluating her. If you waste the first few minutes of the interview reading her resume and making small talk, the candidate who is considering several options, and the great candidates always have several options, may not be impressed. First impressions work both ways. While you want to ask thoughtful questions, you should also identify the candidates who ask thoughtful questions. People who ask good questions are curious, smarter, more flexible and interesting, and understand that they don't have all the answers. Exactly the type of smart creative characteristics you want. The only way to get good at interviewing is to practice. That's why we tell young people to take advantage of every opportunity to interview. Some of them do, but most of them don't, preferring to spend their time on things they think are more important. They don't realize what a great gift we are giving them. Come on, we're saying. You can practice the most important skill you can possibly develop, get paid for doing it, and since you will most likely not be the person's manager, you won't have to live with the consequences of a bad hire. They ignore us. Getting people to interview is like pulling teeth. Of course, not everyone is good at interviewing, and people who don't want to get good at it won't. At Google, we implemented a trusted interviewer program, an elite team of people who were actually good at interviewing and liked to do it. And they got to do the bulk of the work and were rewarded with higher scores during performance review. Product managers who wanted to be in the program had to go through interview training and shadow a minimum of 4 interviewers as they met with candidates. Once in the program, they were scored on a variety of performance metrics, including how many interviews they conducted, reliability — it's amazing how many people think it's okay to cancel interviews at the last minute, or not even show up — and quality and promptness of their feedback. Quality of feedback declines precipitously after 48 hours. Our best interviewers schedule time to enter their feedback right after the interview. We published these stats and let people not in the program challenge the incumbents and replace them if their performance was better. In other words, not interviewing was seen as punishment. With this program, interviewing became a privilege, not a chore, and quality increased across the board. And about that drunken carnival photo. Unless they demonstrate a serious character flaw, we generally don't hold a candidate's online photos and commentary against her. We are hiring for passion, remember? And passionate people will often have an exuberant online presence. This demonstrates a love of the digital medium, an important characteristic in today's world. Schedule interviews for 30 minutes. Who decided that an interview should last an hour? Oftentimes, you walk into an interview and know within minutes that a person is wrong for the company and the job. Who says you have to spend the rest of the hour making useless conversation? What a waste of time. That's why Google interviews are a half hour. Most interviews will result in a no-hire decision, so you want to invest less time in them. And most good interviewers can make that negative call in a half hour. If you like the candidate and want to keep talking, you can always schedule another interview or choose to make time in your calendar right then and there. Easy to do if you have scheduled the following 15 minutes to write up your feedback. The shorter interview time forces a conversation that's more protein and less fat. There's no time for small talk or meaningless questions. It forces people, including, especially you, into a substantive discussion. Not only do most companies conduct overlong interviews, they conduct too many of them. One time, in our early days at Google, we interviewed a particular candidate over 30 times, and we still couldn't decide if we wanted to hire him. That's just wrong. So we declared by fiat that a candidate couldn't be interviewed more than 30 times. Then we did some research and discovered that each additional interviewer after the fourth increased our decision accuracy by less than 1%. In other words, after 4 interviews, the incremental cost of conducting additional interviews outweighs the value the additional feedback contributes to the ultimate hiring decision. So we lowered the maximum to 5, a number with the added benefit, at least for computer scientists, of being prime. Have an opinion. Remember, from the interviewer's standpoint, the goal of the interview is to form an opinion, a strong opinion, a yes or no. At Google, we grade interview candidates on a scale of 1 to 4. The average score falls around a 3, which translates to, I'll be okay with this person getting an offer, but someone else should like them a lot. As an average, 3 is fine. But as an individual response, it's a cop-out, since what it really means is that the interviewer can't make up his mind and is passing the buck to someone else to decide. We encourage interviewers to take a stand. For example, on the product management team, the score of 4 meant this person is perfect for this role. If you don't hire them, expect to hear from me. This isn't just saying we should hire the person. It's saying, if someone wants to get in the way of hiring this person, I will hunt you down and passionately debate the decision based on the objective data included in the packet. The language assigned to these scores was deliberately emotional. Expect to hear from me. Because smart creatives care about who joins their team. It's as if they are inviting someone into their family. They believe every interview must lead to a decision, and that decision is personal. There's no wishy-washy. When you tell people to have an opinion, though, you need to tell them what to have an opinion about. Whether or not to hire the candidate is obvious, but interviewers also need to be guided in how to form that opinion. At Google, we break down candidate evaluations into 4 different categories, and we keep these categories consistent across functions. From sales to finance to engineering, smart creatives tend to score well on all of these, regardless of what they do or at what level. The categories and descriptions. Leadership. We'll want to know how someone has flexed different muscles in various situations in order to mobilize a team. This can include asserting a leadership role at work or with an organization, or even helping a team succeed when they weren't officially appointed as the leader. Role-related knowledge. We look for people who have a variety of strengths and passions, not just isolated skill sets. We also want to make sure that candidates have the experience and the background that will set them up for success in the role. For engineering candidates, in particular, we check out coding skills and technical areas of expertise. General cognitive ability. We're less concerned about grades and transcripts and more interested in how a candidate thinks. We're likely to ask a candidate some role-related questions that provide insight into how they solve problems. Googliness. We want to get a feel for what makes a candidate unique. We also want to make sure this is a place they'll thrive. So we look for signs around their comfort with ambiguity, bias to action, and collaborative nature. Friends don't let friends hire, or promote, friends. Another part of the interviewing process that most companies screw up is letting the hiring manager make the hiring decision. The problem with this is that the hiring manager will probably be the new employee's manager for only a matter of months or a year or two. Organizations are highly fungible. Besides, in the most effective organizations, who you work for matters a lot less than who you work with. Hiring decisions are too important to be left in the hands of a manager who may or may not have a stake in the employee's success a year later. That's why at Google we set up the process so that the hiring decision is made by committee. With hiring committees, it doesn't matter who you are. If you want to hire someone, the decision needs approval from a hiring committee, whose decisions are based on data, not relationships or opinion. The primary criterion for serving on a hiring committee is that you will not be driven by anything other than what is best for the company, period. Committees should have enough members to allow a good range of viewpoints, but should be small enough to allow an efficient process. 4 or 5 is a pretty good number. The best composition promotes a wide variety of perspectives, so aim for diversity, in seniority, in skills and strengths, since people will often favor people cut in their own mold, and in background. The hiring manager is not entirely powerless in a committee-based process. She, or her recruiter, can participate in committee meetings, and she gets to decide whether or not to move a candidate from interview process to offer process, meaning she has veto power, but not hiring power. The hiring committee ensures that people don't hire their friends, unless those friends happen to be superstars. In the early 2000s, as Google started adding employees by the thousands, Eric, Larry, and Sergey observed that many of the newer hires were good, but not as strong as needed. Perhaps they couldn't control what every group was doing, the trio decided, but they could control whom they hired. Larry suggested a policy that senior management would review every offer. The resulting hiring committee process, which was developed by Urs Hölzl, entails a hierarchy of committees, culminating with a committee of one, Larry, who for several years reviewed every offer. This made it clear to everyone involved in hiring just how high a priority it was to the company. The process was designed to optimize for quality, not efficiency, and for control, not scale. Over the years, we have done our best to make it scale efficiently anyway, but our original tenet still stands, even as we pass 45,000 employees. Nothing is more important than the quality of hiring. The unit of currency in this system is the hiring packet, a document containing all the known information about a candidate who has progressed through the interview process. A hiring packet needs to be both comprehensive and standardized, so that all members of the hiring committee get the exact same information, and that information comprises a complete picture of the candidate. The Google hiring packet was designed by engineers with this objective in mind, as well as the objective of keeping Larry happy, since he reviewed each one getting an offer. It is based on a template that is standardized across the entire company, functions, countries, levels, with room for flexibility. When completed, the ideal hiring packet is stuffed to the brim with data, not opinion, and this distinction is critical. If you are the hiring manager or one of the interviewers, it isn't sufficient to express an opinion. You need to support it with data. You can't say, "We should hire Jane because she's smart." You have to say, "We should hire Jane because she's smart and has the MacArthur Fellowship to prove it." Most candidates aren't accommodating enough to win MacArthur Fellowships. So supporting every opinion with data or empirical observations tends to be a lot harder than this example. But when people don't do it, packets get kicked out of the committee. The other important rule is that the packet is the only source of information for the hiring committee. If something isn't in the packet, it doesn't get considered. This forces people to be thorough in constructing a hiring packet. You can't omit information from the packet and then bring it up in the meeting as a power move. Aces up the sleeve get people shot. Figuratively. Usually. The people who get hired are the ones with the best packets, not the loudest cheerleaders on the committee. The best packets are like any other great piece of executive communications. A one-page summary with all the key facts and comprehensive supporting material. The summary consists of hard data and evidence in support of the hiring decision, and the supporting material includes interview reports, resume, compensation history, reference information, especially if the candidate was sourced via internal reference, and any other relevant material, college transcripts, copy of a candidate's patents or awards, writing or coding samples. In compiling a hiring packet, details matter. For example, for recent graduates, does their school's GPA comply with a typical American 4-point scale? Or is it like the University of Geneva, which grades on a 6-point scale? Class rank is another important detail for recent grads. Because of grade inflation, an A may no longer be worth that much, but a top class ranking is still the best. The packet also needs to be well formatted and easy to read quickly. For example, the candidate's best or worst answers should be highlighted for easy reference. But not everything should be formatted. A candidate's original resume should be included, as is, so everyone can see the typos and formatting errors or bold or italic fonts. Getting all of these details of the packet right is what enables the committee to get the details of the candidate right. Even a purely database packet can lie, though. Interviewers have natural biases. One person's 3.8 rating is another's 2.9, and another more irrational person's pi. The solution to this? More data. Stipulate that all packets include statistics on each interviewer's past scores, including number of interviews, range of scores, and mean, so committee members can factor into their decision-making which interviewers grade higher and which clump their scores in the middle of the bell curve. Interviewers, knowing that this data is part of the packet, will often be more conscientious in grading tougher and providing more opinionated scores. Some managers want absolute control over building their teams. When we instituted the committee system, some people hated it and even threatened to leave. That's okay. If someone cares that much about having absolute control over their team, perhaps you don't want them around. Dictatorial tendencies rarely contain themselves to just one aspect of work. The good managers will realize that hiring by committee is actually better for the company as a whole. Similarly, deciding who gets promoted should also be via a committee rather than a top-down management decision. Our managers can nominate their people for promotion and act as advocates throughout the process, but the decision itself is out of their hands. The reasons are the same as they are for hiring. Promotions have a company-wide impact, so they are too important to be left in the hands of individual managers. But with promotions, there is an additional factor favoring a committee-based process. Many smart creatives, a majority in our experience, are conflict-averse and have a hard time saying no. With committees, the rejection doesn't come from an individual, but from the more faceless committee. This small detail can have a surprisingly big calming effect on promotion rates. There's a lot more to how Google hires people than we can get into here. If you want to learn more and get the science behind not just recruiting but all of our people practices, read our colleague Laszlo Bock's upcoming book, Work Rules. Laszlo runs people operations at Google, and in his book, he details how the principles we established in the early days grew into a system that any team or business can emulate. Urgency of the role isn't sufficiently important to compromise quality in hiring. Our emphasis on quality hiring does not mean the process has to be slow. In fact, everything that we've described about our method is set up to make it faster. We keep interviews at a half hour and limit ourselves to 5 per candidate. We tell interviewers that once they finish meeting with a candidate, they should immediately tell the recruiter thumbs up or down. We design candidate packets so that the hiring committees making final decisions on candidates can review a packet within 120 seconds. Literally, we timed it. These steps make the hiring process scalable and force clarity. They're good for candidates, too, because piling on interviews and stringing out a decision is unfair. After all, if they're the kind of people you want to hire, they want to move fast, too. But there is a golden rule to hiring that cannot be violated. The urgency of the role isn't sufficiently important to compromise quality in hiring. In the inevitable showdown between speed and quality must prevail. Disproportionate rewards. Once you get your smart creatives on board, you need to pay them. Exceptional people deserve exceptional pay. Here again, we can look to the sports world for guidance. Outstanding athletes get paid outstanding amounts. It's not uncommon for the best player on a professional team to be compensated with deals worth hundreds of millions, while the deal the rookie at the end of the bench gets is only in the hundreds of thousands. Are those stars worth it? Baseball great Babe Ruth, when asked if he thought it was right that his salary was higher than President Herbert Hoover's, answered, "Why not? I had a better year than he did." We have a more reasoned response. Yes, they are worth it when they perform up to expectations, because successful athletes possess rare skills that are tremendously leverageable. When they do well, they have a disproportionate impact. They help teams win, and winning drives huge business benefits. More fans, more viewers, more jerseys and hats sold, hence the big money. Smart creatives today may not share many characteristics with professional athletes, but they do share one important thing: the potential for disproportionate impact. Top performers get paid well in athletics, and they should in business too. If you want better performance from the best, celebrate and reward it disproportionately. This doesn't mean you should give new hires a blank check. In fact, the compensation curve should start low. You can attract the best smart creatives with factors beyond money. The great things they can do, the people they'll work with, the responsibility and opportunities they'll be given, the inspiring company culture and values, and yes, maybe even free food and happy dogs sitting desk-side. One of the early engineers at Google wanted to bring his ferret to the office. We said yes. He didn't haggle over salary. But when those smart creatives become employees and start performing, pay them appropriately. The bigger the impact, the bigger the comp. At the opposite end of the scale, managers should reward people greatly only when they do a great job. They are managing professionals, not coaching Little League, where everyone gets a standing ovation and a trophy, even the dreamer in right field who spends the game picking daisies and hunting for four-leaf clovers. All men and women are created equal in that they are all endowed with certain inalienable rights, but that decidedly does not mean they are all equally good at what they do. So don't pay or promote them as if they are. The business world traditionally rewards people for being closer to the top, case in point, outrageous CEO salaries, or for being closer to the transactions, investment bankers, salespeople. But what's most important in the internet century is product excellence. So it follows that big rewards should be given to the people who are closest to great products and innovations. This means that yes, the lower-level employee who helps create a breakthrough product or feature should be very handsomely rewarded. Pay outrageously good people outrageously well, regardless of their title or tenure. What counts is their impact. We are as puzzled as economists are by egalitarian pay systems, in which people making vastly different contributions are nonetheless paid more or less the same amount. Doesn't the use of narrow pay bands reward low effort and demoralize the highest performers? One possible explanation is that widely varying wages are bad for team morale and can reduce team productivity. We believe this trade-off is well worth making. In our experience, getting great work out of the best performers outweighs any team problems from perceived unfairness. Mostly, people are happy for their colleagues and strive to do something great themselves so they can earn a similar payday. Trade the M&Ms. Keep the raisins. You have done all this work to create a hiring process that brings in all these awesome, smart creatives. And how do they pay you back? By leaving. That's right. Newsflash, when you hire great people, some of them may come to realize that there is a world beyond yours. This isn't a bad thing. In fact, it's an inevitable byproduct of a healthy, innovative team. Still, fight like hell to keep them. The best way to retain smart creatives is to not let them get too comfortable, to always come up with ways to make their jobs interesting. When Georges Herrick, who was part of the team that created AdSense and who helped to solve the ad suck problem we discussed earlier in the book, was thinking about leaving the company, Eric suggested that he might be interested in sitting in on his staff meetings. So it came to be that Eric's staff meetings included the founders, all the execs who reported to Eric, and Georges, who was also added to the staff's email distribution list. Eric and the rest of the company's leaders got more perspective from the engineering trenches, and Georges learned a lot about business. He was intrigued enough by what he heard that he ended up joining the product management team and stayed at the company for 2 more years. That's 2 years of contribution from Georges we otherwise would not have gotten. Jonathan employed the same approach when he was looking for help in managing his staff meetings. Typically, senior execs may bring in a chief of staff to play this role, but having a full-time chief of staff just encourages politics. Jonathan's solution was to rotate a series of APMs through the job in 6-month stints, serving as his de facto chief of staff and working directly for Jonathan while still holding down their day jobs. Other APMs were encouraged to sign up for so-called chain gang tasks, which were side projects posted on an internal site for which anyone could volunteer. For example, one task, created in September 2003, was to help Larry Page learn more about how projects got done at Google. Maybe not the most exciting assignment, but several young APMs jumped at the chance to work with the company's co-founder. The point of these assignments wasn't to spice up our staff meetings or to take advantage of cheap labor. It was to make the lives of our talented employees more interesting and challenging. But often it takes more than interesting side projects to keep people engaged and prevent them from leaving. You need to prioritize the interests of the highly valued individual over the constraints of the organization. Salar Kamangar, who the founders hired straight out of Stanford, is a great example of this. Salar helped invent AdWords and spent several years in the product organization. But when he was ready to expand his responsibilities and become a general manager, we didn't have a role for him. So we created one, appointing him the head of YouTube. There are numerous other cases like this where smart creatives need or want to do something new, and the company figures out a way to make it happen. Do the best thing for the person, and make the organization adjust. Encouraging people to take on new roles can be institutionalized in the form of rotations, but it needs to be done properly or it will backfire. Google's APM program and its spin-offs in marketing and people operations forces rotation every 12 months. This works great in a small program with entry-level employees, but it is difficult to create a structured rotation program across bigger segments of the company. So our approach has always been to encourage job movement, to make it as easy as possible, and to make it a standard part of the management discussion. We discuss it in our staff meetings and one-on-ones. Who on your team is a good candidate for rotation? Where do they want to go? Do you think that is the best thing for them? Make sure, as you have these discussions, that the employees in question are the good ones. Managers are like kids trading goodies after a night of Halloween trick-or-treating. When you push them to rotate people off their teams, their inclination is to hang on to the Reese's Cups and M&Ms and get rid of the boxes of raisins. This may be good for them, but it's bad for the company. It keeps the very best people, the ones you want to keep challenged and inspired, locked up on one team. When Eric let Georges Herrick sit in on his staff meetings, he didn't do it because Georges was a mediocre performer whom he was trying to improve, but rather because Georges was a superior performer he was trying to keep. Make managers trade away their M&Ms. Let them keep their raisins. If you love them, let them go, but only after taking these steps. Even if you keep your best people challenged and engaged, some of them will still consider leaving for greener pastures. When that happens, focus your retention efforts on the stars, the leaders, and the innovators, not necessarily the same people, and do whatever it takes to keep them around. The loss of these people can have a big ripple effect, as they often inspire their followers to leave too. Because people seldom leave over compensation, the first step to keeping them is to listen. They want to be heard, to be relevant, and valued. In these conversations, the leader's role is not to be the advocate of the organization, please stay, but the advocate of the smart creative who is thinking about leaving. Many employees, particularly the younger ones, tend to think in terms of shorter time frames, perhaps still attached to the rhythms of a school year. They can overreact when they hit a bump in the road and relish the days when they could start each semester with a clean notebook and no grades yet recorded. Help them take a longer-term perspective. How could staying at the company ultimately position them for much greater success when they do decide to leave? Have they considered the financial ramifications of leaving? Do they have a clear financial plan and a good sense of what they might be leaving behind? Listen to why they want to leave and help them find a way to perhaps recharge their dilithium crystals while sticking around. Then, if they want to continue the conversation, have a plan for how they can develop their career while staying. This demonstrates your commitment to their success, not just the company's. The best smart creatives often want to leave so they can go start something on their own. Don't discourage this, but do ask them for their elevator pitch. Elevator pitch is venture capital speak for you have 30 seconds to impress me with your business idea. What is your strategic foundation? What sort of culture do you envision? What would you tell me if I were a prospective investor? If they don't give good answers, then they obviously aren't ready to go. In that case, we usually advise them to stick around and continue to contribute at the company while they are working on their idea, and tell them that when they actually can convince us to invest, we'll let them go with our best wishes, if not a check. This is a hard-to-resist offer, and it has helped us retain numerous talented people. Then there is the case when the valued smart creative has an attractive offer in hand from another company. Sometimes that person will negotiate with an either-or threat. Either do this, or else I'm out of here. When that happens, the game is usually already over, since someone who operates that way is not emotionally attached to the company anymore and is unlikely to rebuild that commitment. But if there is a bond still there, and you want to make a counteroffer, do it very quickly, within an hour if possible. After that, the employee has started to settle into the new company in her mind. And, of course, if it truly is in the best interest of the person to go, then let her go. As Reid Hoffman, Jonathan's former colleague at Apple and founding CEO of LinkedIn, notes, just because a job ends, your relationship with your employee doesn't have to. The first thing you should do when a valuable employee tells you he is leaving is try to change his mind. The second is congratulate him on the new job and welcome him to your company's alumni network. We had one talented young product manager, Jessica Ewing, who helped us launch iGoogle, which let users customize the Google homepage, and was retired in 2013, and had a very bright future at the company. But she also had a burning desire to try her hand at writing. Think about your career trajectory, we advised. Think about those stock units you still have to vest. She did, and left anyway. Jessica, we haven't heard from you in a while. Why don't you write? Firing sucks. Not as much as getting fired, to be sure, but it's still plenty bad. If you've ever had to do it, you know how difficult it is to pull some poor soul aside and tell him it's not working out. Maybe the employee will see it coming and take it well. Maybe he won't and will start throwing things. And maybe he'll use labor laws as silver bullets in a vindictive quest to make your life miserable. All the factors that make the right smart creatives great hires can make the wrong ones hell to fire. Their intensity, their confidence, their fearlessness. So always keep in mind, from the outset, that the best way to avoid having to fire underperformers is not to hire them. This is why we would rather our hiring process generate more false negatives, people we should have hired but didn't, than false positives, we shouldn't have hired but did. Test yourself. If you could trade the bottom 10% of your team for new hires, would your organization improve? If so, then you need to look at the hiring process that yielded those low performers and see how you can improve it. Another test. Are there members of your team whom, if they told you they were leaving, you would not fight hard to keep? If there are employees you would let go, then perhaps you should. One last note. There are some people who actually enjoy firing. Beware of them. Firing instills a culture of fear that will inevitably fail, and I'll just fire them is an excuse for not investing the time to execute the hiring process well. Google's hiring do's and don'ts. Hire people who are smarter and more knowledgeable than you are. Don't hire people you can't learn from or be challenged by. Hire people who will add value to the product and our culture. Don't hire people who won't contribute well to both. Hire people who will get things done. Don't hire people who just think about problems. Hire people who are enthusiastic, self-motivated, and passionate. Don't hire people who just want a job. Hire people who inspire and work well with others. Don't hire people who prefer to work alone. Hire people who will grow with your team and with the company. Don't hire people with narrow skill sets or interests. Hire people who are well-rounded, with unique interests and talents. Don't hire people who only live to work. Hire people who are ethical and who communicate openly. Don't hire people who are political or manipulative. Hire only when you've found a great candidate. Don't settle for anything less. Career. Choose the F-16. We are frequently asked for career advice. Budding entrepreneurs, nooglers fresh out of school, emerging superstars, they all want to know what they should do to manage their path. And if we are ever fortunate enough to be invited to give another graduation speech, say at one of our alma maters, are you paying attention, Princeton and Claremont McKenna? It might sound something like this. Treat your career like you are surfing. When Jonathan was in business school and interested in product management, he went to a couple of presentations given by prospective employers. One was from a company that was a leader in consumer packaged goods, stuff like shampoo and household cleaners. They described product management in their business as a science driven by precise data garnered from focus groups and product performance. It's like driving forward by looking in your rearview mirror, they said. And they meant that as a good thing. Then he went to a presentation by one of the leading high-tech firms in Silicon Valley. They said that product management in Silicon Valley was like flying an F-16 at Mach 2 over a boulder-strewn landscape 2 meters off the ground. Plus, if you crash, it's just like a video game at the arcade, and we have lots of quarters. Cool. The best industries are the ones where you're flying the F-16, your pocket full of quarters, trying not to crash. In business, and particularly in high tech, it's not enough to be great at what you do. You have to catch at least one really big wave and ride it all the way into shore. When people are right out of school, they tend to prioritize company first, then job, then industry. But at this point in their career, that is exactly the wrong order. The right industry is paramount, because while you will likely switch companies several times in your career, it is much harder to switch industries. Think of the industry as the place you surf. In Northern California, the most rad waves are at Mavericks, dude. And the company as the wave you catch. You always want to be in the place with the biggest and best waves. If you choose the wrong company, or you have bad luck with an aggro boss who drops in on your first wave, you'll still have a killer time if you're surfing in an industry with bodacious waves. All right, Mr. Spicoli, that's enough surfer lingo. Conversely, if you choose the wrong industry early in your career, then growth opportunities within your company will be limited. Your boss won't move, and you'll be stuck without much leverage when you're ready to look for jobs at other companies. Fortunately, the tectonic forces driving the internet century mean that a lot of industries are great places to surf. It's not just the internet companies that have big upside, but also energy, pharmaceuticals, high-tech manufacturing, advertising, media, entertainment, and consumer electronics. The most interesting industries are those where product cycle times are accelerating, because this creates more chances for disruption, and so more opportunities for fresh talent. But even businesses like energy and pharmaceuticals, where product cycle times are long, are ripe for massive transformation and opportunity. From a compensation standpoint, stock options and other forms of equity are quite limited early in your career, so it's more lucrative to develop expertise in the right industry than to bet on a particular company. Later, as you gain experience and age, it becomes more important to pick the right wave. At that point, you can start to earn compensation packages with much more equity, so the priority flips. Always listen for those who get technology. After you pick the industry, then it's time to pick the company. When you do, listen for the people who truly get technology. These are the genius-level smart creatives who see, before the rest of us, where technology is going and how it will transform industries. Bill Gates and Paul Allen saw that chips and computers were getting cheap and that software would be the key to the future of computing. So they started Microsoft. Chad Hurley saw that cheap video cameras, bandwidth, and storage would transform how video entertainment is created and consumed. So he co-founded YouTube. Reid Hoffman knew that the connecting power of the web would be vital to professionals. So he started LinkedIn. Mark Benioff believed that powerful software would live in the cloud. So he based Salesforce.com on that principle and didn't waver during the dot-com meltdown. Steve Jobs foresaw computers as consumer accessories, and it took over 2 decades for the technology and market to catch up to him. How do you know if someone gets it? It helps to look at their history. Often, they are playing with technology and entrepreneurship long before they think of it as a career. Reid Hoffman got his first job at age 12 by presenting a copy of a computer games manual marked up with his suggestions for product improvements to one of the game's developers. He wasn't looking for a job. He wanted to make the game better. Mark Benioff sold his first computer program, How to Juggle, and started a company making games for the Atari 800 when he was 15. Larry Page built a printer out of Legos. It was dot matrix, but still. These are the famous examples, but there are many others, people who may not be as well known, but brim with insights. They are the ones navigating the best waves in the best places. Find them, hook in, and hang on. Plan your career. Career development takes effort and forethought. You need to plan it. This is such an obvious point, yet it's astonishing how many people who have come to us over the years have failed to do it. Jonathan usually gives these folks a set of career exercises, accompanied with his favorite Tom Lehrer line, "Life is like a sewer. What you get out of it depends on what you put into it." And a promise that if they put real effort into the exercises, he will help them. Here are some simple steps to creating a plan. Think about your ideal job, not today, but 5 years from now. Where do you want to be? What do you want to do? How much do you want to make? Write down the job description. If you saw this job on a website, what would the posting look like? Now fast forward 4 or 5 years and assume you are in that job. What does your 5 years from now resume look like? What's the path you took from now to then to get to your best place? Keep thinking about that ideal job and assess your strengths and weaknesses in light of it. What do you need to improve to get there? This step requires external input, so talk to your manager or peers and get their take on it. Finally, how will you get there? What training do you need? What work experience? By the way, if your conclusion is that you are ready for your ideal job today, then you aren't thinking big enough. Start over and make that ideal job a stretch, not a gimme. If you follow these steps, it will work. If you don't follow them, you will likely prove Yogi Berra's point that you've got to be careful if you don't know where you're going because you might not get there. Statistics is the new plastics. Stats are sexy. Deal with it. The sexiest jobs in the internet century will involve statistics, and not just in a parallel, geeky fantasy world. Halvaria notes that it is always a good idea for individuals to build expertise in areas that complement things that are getting cheap. And data, along with computing power to crunch it, is definitely getting cheap. We are in the era of big data, and big data needs statisticians to make sense of it. The democratization of data means that those who can analyze it well will win. Data is the sword of the 21st century. Those who wield it well, the samurai. So start sharpening that blade, Uruwashi, cultured warrior, and take statistics. But I'm not a numbers person, we hear some of you whining, especially you in the back with the magenta shirt. Don't worry, there is hope. Asking the questions and interpreting the answers is as important a skill as coming up with the answers themselves. No matter your business, learn how the right data, crunched the right way, will help you make better decisions. Learn which questions to ask the people who are good with numbers and how to make the best use of their replies. Even if you aren't a numbers person, you can learn how to use the numbers to get smarter. Read. Most organizations have an impressive archive of written information. Find the best of it and read it. At Google, we always tell people who come to us seeking advice to ingest the founder's letter from our 2004 IPO and all the internal strategy memos that Eric and Larry subsequently wrote. These are the clearest, most concise explanations of our values and strategy that can be found. Yet many people are too busy to read them. Don't make that mistake. And don't stop at your company's borders. The web has a lot of written information, and while much of it is drivel, there is a lot of great stuff too. Figure out how to use the various tools at your disposal to tap into the sites and authors you respect. Create circles of other like-minded smart people and swap books and articles. One of the best, easiest ways to get ahead in a field is to know more about it. The best way to do that is to read. People always say they don't have the time to read. But what they are really saying is that they aren't making it a priority to learn as much as they can about their business. You know who reads a lot about their business? CEOs. So think like a CEO and read. Know your elevator pitch. Let's say you run into your manager's manager in the hallway, and she asks you what you're working on. Heck, let's make it the CEO. What do you say? This isn't a rhetorical question. Try it out right now, out loud. Go ahead. You have 30 seconds. That didn't sound great. You obviously haven't practiced your elevator pitch. Work on it. Your pitch should explain what you are working on, the technical insight that's driving it, how you are measuring your success, particularly customer benefit, and perhaps how it fits into the big picture. Know this and practice it so you can say it with conviction. Job seekers should also have an elevator pitch. This shouldn't be a condensed version of your resume, but should rather highlight its most interesting parts along with what you want to do and the impact you know you will have, the benefit to the customer and the company. What can you say that no one else can? Go abroad. Business, regardless of size or scope, is forever permanently global, while humans are naturally provincial. So it doesn't matter where you are or where you came from. Get out of there whenever you have the chance. Go live and work somewhere else. If you're at a big company, seek the international assignments. Your managers will love you for it, and you'll be a much more valuable employee as a result. If working overseas isn't an option, then travel. And when you are out and about, don't forget to see the world as your customers do. If you're in retail, walk through a store or two. If you're in media, pick up a paper or turn on the radio. It's amazing how often people come back from business trips to foreign lands with insights gleaned solely from their conversation with the taxi driver who took them from the airport to the hotel. If those drivers only knew how much power they have in shaping global business strategy. Combine passion with contribution. This from our estimable former colleague, Sheryl Sandberg. It is the ultimate luxury to combine passion and contribution. It is also a very clear path to happiness. She couldn't be more right. You will not be as successful as you could be if you only like what you do and don't love it. Trite, perhaps, but true. Sheryl is also right in saying that combining passion and contribution is a luxury. Not that it's expensive, but just rare. It's something that many people either can't figure out, how many people truly know their passion at the outset of their careers, or can't afford. You may love whittling garden gnomes, but the world loves engineers, and your spouse and children love a regular paycheck. That's why we make this our last career point and not our first. Finding your passion isn't always simple. Perhaps when you were starting out, you were just happy to find a job, regardless of your passion. Then, as your career progresses, you find that it's not the rocket ship you expected it to be. Perhaps you haven't nailed both sides of the passion-contribution equation. You could drop everything and start over. Hi, honey. Fine. Oh, by the way, I quit my job and bought a cattle ranch in Montana. Honey? Or you could take a more deliberate approach. Adjust your course. Make your 5 years out ideal job closer to your if only I could dream job, yet attainable from your current path. We've seen even this simple act of setting the right goal turn around people's careers.